if we are putting a boundary in place and that person is feeling insecure or confused, this is not our job to reassure them.
The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents.
Are you operating from a place of love, or are you operating from a place of fear?
I'm not going to allow this burden to essentially permeate through me, and down through my generations, like it's stopping right here with me.
There are three factors to create an emotion. There is the language that we are using, the mental focus, what do we need to focus on, what do we need to think to create that emotion, and physiology.
Welcome to the Minds Unleashed show with your host, Eric. Join him on the journey where we explore transformative ideas, confront challenges, and discover new perspectives. Together, let's elevate the mindset and transform your personal and business success. So whether you're seeking motivation, practical advice, or a fresh perspective, you've come to the right place. Join Eric on the Minds Unleashed show, and let's dive in together to empower your mind and unleash freedom.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Minds Unleashed show. Join me on this pursuit to see what it takes to empower your mind and unleash freedom. If you get value out of this, please share this podcast with a friend, and don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and leave us a review. I truly appreciate it. Let's get into today's show. I'm so grateful to introduce you to today's guest, Sabrina Hall. Sabrina is a neuro-linguistic programming therapist, self-mastery mentor, and life coach for moms around the world. Welcome to the show, Sabrina.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for the introduction. I'm so grateful to be here with you today.
Perfect. Let's get into today's show and dive right into it. I want to start with a quote that I found on your website, and I really liked it, and it's resonated with me, and it's definitely had me reflecting on my own life. And that is, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents. Can you kind of explain, one, what that quote means to you and, how it's impacted your life?
This quote just says it all, really. When I was a child, I really felt, and I probably didn't use the word burden. I didn't know what the word was at the time, but I definitely felt a sense of responsibility with regards to how much my mom would do outside of motherhood. And my mom always told me that she'd sacrifice everything for me, that we are, myself and my siblings, were the reason why she won't do X, Y, Z, or won't have a career, or wouldn't be able to go out with maybe friends or whatever. And I always felt like a sense of responsibility for that. And it felt really heavy. So even though I didn't have the words as a child, I had that feeling of that burden. This is my fault. This is the reason why my mom is not doing what she wants to do in her life. And I feel like it's so important to remember that as adults, when we have children, to remember that maybe this is not about self-sacrificing everything in our life. Sure, having kids, you're going to have to make some sacrifices and compromises. But also, I feel like as a mom myself, my responsibility is to show my child that I can be a great mother, and I can be really tender and really caring and making sure that his needs are met. And I have also parts of me that are wanting to explore my needs as a human and my desires and my dreams. So that's what the quote means for me. And this is the reason why this quote is really important to me.
That's very beautifully put. Can you kind of talk about how, being a mom yourself, that you're not sacrificing your career or friendships and making sure that you don't put that, heavy burden onto your own children?
Sure. When I had my child 8 years ago, and it was a difficult period in my life because I became a mother. So I went from working in the corporate for 8 years to having a child and having a totally different perspective about life, totally different responsibilities. And it's interesting because somebody said one day, it's a shame that our children don't come with a manual where you can get to know like how they work and how they function, and understanding fully what it is. So it's always a trials and error, with a child. And the opposite effect happened with me. At the beginning of being a mother, I definitely felt that I was carrying my mom's baggage, and that there was a part of me that wanted to self-sacrifice and be, doing the things at home and doing the cooking and the cleaning and just raising my child, and being really like, forgetting about my needs. And this is what a mother should do. And I remember realizing that I had this pattern, and I remember also taking the decision that I didn't want that pattern in my life, and that pattern was not coming from me, but it was coming from my mother and her mom, and that lineage of women, in ancestrally. And I managed to pivot, and actually my child, how do I put it? But my child actually gave me the motivation to actually do something about my life, and to be the best mom and the best example that I could be for him. And so I studied, I became a massage therapist, and then I wanted to be a coach, and I studied and I learned. And instead of going the other way and self-sacrificing, I actually went in the way of, I'm going to grow, I'm going to learn, I'm going to make use of the little time that I had as a mother to do something great for myself, and to be able to provide in a bigger way for myself, but also for my family.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think what you said too on how you're giving your child that motivation, the child's giving you that motivation to do something really also reflects back to that quote, right? Where it's, you said, I'm not going to, allow this burden to essentially permeate through me, and down through my generations. Like, it's stopping right here with me, and I think that's super hard to do and very powerful to do. So I really commend you for that.
Thank you. And it's really difficult because as mothers, like, you might feel a little bit judged. Some mothers are really taking their role in a different way, and everybody does things differently. And I feel like at the beginning, the reason why maybe it didn't happen straight away is because I had a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. And I always wondered what other people would think about me, and wondered if people thought, mothers would see me as ungrateful for what I had, or undermining my role as a mother. So yeah, there's a lot of stereotype and stigma and limitation around that, for sure, that I had to work my way through that, and detangled the stuff that was stopping me from moving forward as a woman.
Yeah. How did you kind of take that guilt and shame that you felt by other people and almost like get through it? Like what did that look like?
I realized that shame and that guilt wasn't mine. So, when I spoke to you about just now with my mother, and realizing that was passed on, I realized that there was a lot of conditioning that was passed on to women and mothers, right, around the guilt and the shame. And I realized that those emotions were not actually mine, that I was carrying that from other mothers, from other women, the stories that you hear about self-sacrificing, and having to, like, doing stuff for your children and putting themselves first. And you hear those phrases that, all the time, of mothers saying, this is what it's like to be a mother. You just have to forget about yourself for a while. This is what it's like. And it's almost like, yeah, when you hear those sentences said over and over again from your grandmother and your parents and your friends, that you start to believe those beliefs, right? You start to think, oh, well, this is what it's like to be a mother. You just have to do that. And I realized that this was not mine. So the guilt and shame were around the conditioning. And so when I realized that they were not mine, then I managed to kind of disconnect with that. And that rebel part of me wanting to wanted to break those apart and go, no, this is not what it's like. And it doesn't have to be that way. We can be great mothers, and we can also fulfill to the best we can our needs and desires.
Yeah. So if, you're listening to this and either you're thinking about having kids or you have kids, like what kind of advice would you have for those people that feel that shame or guilt from other people, family or friends, like towards their, children?
I think it really comes down to the connection that we have with ourselves first. And it can feel very hard and very difficult to take on other people's belief, other people's limitation. And so we have to differentiate what is mine and what is theirs, and actually reconnecting with who we are at our core, reconnecting with our values, what's important to us, what matters to us, our needs and desires, and make decisions according to that and not according to what people might think. Because people are going to always judge and criticize and dislike or dismiss. There's always going to be a risk that people are not going to like us and like the decisions that we are taking. And so I find that it's so much easier to actually ignore that because people are just going to do what they're going to do, but really reconnecting to what's important to yourself. And if you have values and needs, you can connect with those and take decisions from that place, from a place of love instead of a place of fear.
Yes, and that's so true today, right? With, people are really truly going to judge you regardless of the decision you make. And I think sometimes that's a reflection of them, but it's usually a reflection of them at the end of the day. And I think going about it with the mindset of love over fear is a winning mindset in that regard. And I think it's going to drive people to want to actually solve their own internal issues, not let the judgment of other people get to them. And I think that's super powerful for people to hear.
I mean, this is a concept that I've learned about maybe 4 years ago when my coach asked me, are you operating from a place of love or are you operating from a place of fear? And a lot of us are operating from a place of fear. We want to avoid pain. We want to avoid discomfort, and we would do anything to avoid that, to avoid the discomfort of shame and guilt and being rejected, being disliked, being judged. We will do anything to do that, to not be in that situation and feel those emotions. So very often we take decisions based on fear instead of love for ourselves and for the life we're trying to build.
Yeah, I think you said that really well, right? Where your coach said, are you operating from a place of love or fear? And I think that's also true on, children today, teenagers, young adults, right? And so many times they have, parent-child conflict, and they operate from that anxious, that guilt, that shame. But I think if they tried to 180 it and operate from that place of love, it's going to have a much more positive impact on your own life, but also the people's lives around you, and it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with at that young adult age. And it's something that's super hard to navigate from a thought perspective.
For sure. That's definitely something I can imagine being introduced in school for sure. Anything to do with our own connection with ourselves, I think would be so beneficial.
So when you said your coach asked you, are you operating from a place of love or fear? What was your response to that? And how did that conversation evolve and kind of grow from there?
It was definitely fear. So at the time, I started my business as a coach, and I hired a coach and I went on to a mastermind. And, I don't know if you've been into a coaching mastermind before, but you share, how you feel and what you think about your business, what to do. And I think at the time we talked about pricing our work as coaches. And I remember her saying that, what I was charging was way too low. And I remember saying that I just didn't want to raise my prices. I didn't feel comfortable with that. But the reason why I was not comfortable with that is because I was scared to be judged. I was scared. I come from a poor family. So, the mindset I had when I was a little child and the memories that I had was that my parents were poor. They didn't have any money. I felt embarrassed. All I could hear were talks about credit cards and debts and all of that. And so I realized at a time when I was getting coached by this woman that I had a lot of there was a relationship that I had with money, and that at the time I felt not comfortable talking about money, not comfortable raising my prices. And my coach asked me, are you making that choice because of fear or because of love? And that was a big, light bulb moment. And I was like, you are right. It's from fear. It comes from fear. And from that moment on, I try my best to ask myself the question, am I operating right now from fear or from love? And that's such a good question, I think. Such a good question.
Yeah, no, I really like that too, because growing up for myself, like the topic of money was definitely like that topic where you didn't go into that topic, right? It was kind of like, you're unsure of it. It's really that anxiety, discomfort, I had a similar experience with the debt and the credit cards, we're trying to make it work. And it doesn't set you up to have a good relationship with money, or it will do the complete opposite and make you, instead of a fear mindset, you have like an abundance mindset, or you have the mindset of like, how much does that cost? Oh, I don't care, I'll just buy it, right? Because you grew up in a scarcity mindset, growing up, and now you want to not operate in that level. And so I think sometimes it can have very polarizing effects on you. What was that experience like growing up, in an environment of, financial instability, parents maybe arguing a lot, maybe they weren't, emotionally mature, for you in those moments? What was that like?
It's such a big topic. Yeah, my whole childhood was very. I was brought up in a dysfunctional family, and so there was a lot of argument. There was a lot of dispute around, who spends what, and my mom was not working at the time, so she was doing like cash in hand jobs, like little bits here and there. But I remember the shame. I remember feeling like an outsider. I didn't feel like I belong. And I remember my friends, going on school trips and doing things or having branded clothes or having the coolest shoes and the coolest like stuff at school and everything that I had was just like nothing like that. It was just like literally going to the corner shop or like the supermarket and getting anything that was in like discounted. Now it's fine. I'm not judging that and at all. But I just remember the feeling. I just remember the emotions. And my mom was having such a scarcity mindset as well, and she was openly voicing her opinions about rich people and how the neighbors have got money and how they're rich and how they're selfish. And so the image that I had about people who had money was not a good one, where the image that I had was rich people are bad people, rich people are greedy, rich people are selfish. And I really, really believed in that until growing up and realizing that we all have a relationship with money. And it was about undoing all of that.
What did that undoing look like?
That was very much, I would say, quite a painful work. I've done hours and hours of writing my limiting beliefs around money, around possessions. Did some, that came up in therapy as well, in my coaching sessions, really detangling every little bit that were making me feel inadequate when having money, saving money, investing money, talking about money, and all of that. But that's the conditioning, right?
Yeah. What kind of limiting beliefs did you have like around money that you were like writing out? And then how did you kind of overcome and heal through those?
So I did a lot of subconscious work with that, which is with uh, NLP and EMDR, coaching as well. And I didn't see a therapist or coaching or coaches, specifically for that, but it comes up, right? But there is a quick exercise that I like to do to dismantle limiting belief. Look, so for example, one of the beliefs that I had was that rich people are greedy. Rich people have got usually bad intention. Obviously, I know this is not true, right? Like you have good, and I'm just putting that in quotation mark, good people and bad people, and it doesn't matter. Like, if you're a good person, if you are rich, you make good thing from that. If you're a bad person or you've got bad intention, then you will use your money in a not very ethical way, perhaps. So one of the questions I ask myself when I've got a limiting belief is this true? Is this a fact or not? So when I say, for example, rich people are greedy, is that a fact or not? It's not a fact. Why is it not a fact? And I try to challenge myself because rich people can be good. Rich people can have a good heart. Rich people are creative, creative. Rich people could have good intention. And so I'm giving myself like as many reasons as to why the opposite belief is true. So rich people are good. And then I'll try to find as many reasons as possible. So this is a kind of conscious exercise that I do. And I do that with any kind of belief that I have. When I realize there's one, then I'm like, okay, let's work on that.
I've actually never heard that before. I think that's a very interesting way where you write down what is your limiting belief and then you're like, what happens if that person is talking through it and says like, oh no, it's true, right? Where they're like, rich people are greedy. Do you try to challenge that belief or do you just try to find like where that belief comes from to just challenge the like origin of it?
Yeah, so let's see if I've got a client that I'm helping and this is the belief that comes up, then I would ask why. Why do you think rich people are greedy? Oh, because when I was 5 years old, this happened. I went to the shop and I saw this person buying all the bread or whatever. I'm just making something up here. So it's usually, yeah, it usually stems from an experience that somebody had or they've heard something. And so I would then challenge the belief, what would the opposite belief be true? Let's go there. Let's give some reason. And I mean, usually people are realize pretty quickly that the belief that they have comes from a conditioning. It comes from somewhere. It's interesting because that belief, let's say, rich people are greedy, it really stops people from having more money, having more wealth, raising their prices if they're business owner because they are fearful of being perceived as greedy. It's almost like we're projecting onto other people with our belief, right? If I believe something, that means that everyone believes it too.
I think one limiting belief that my family instilled into me growing up was that you're always going to be in debt, whether it's college, car, house, vacations. You're always going to be in debt. So, like, why does this one more, credit card debt matter? And I always consistently challenge that because I was like, just because you can buy something doesn't mean you can afford it. Right. And so I think it was definitely not a fun 1v6 1v8 at the family get-togethers, but it was something that I always stood strongly on because of, like you mentioned, that conditioning that you have and the self-reflection to realize that the way of how you were taught or the things or the beliefs you were given is not always 100%, is something that is super challenging, when you're like 16 or 18 or 21 and you're challenging the beliefs of your family members is a very hard kind of mental journey to go through.
It's bold and it's scary because you are taking the risk to be rejected and being disliked from the tribe, right? If you think differently, can you still be in the tribe or not, in your tribe? And this is why people just don't want to challenge those beliefs. And it feels really safe to have your set of belief and play within that set of belief and just stay in. That's why people don't want to change sometimes. They're scared. Unconsciously, they might not know, but they get scared in exploring the other side of the belief because the purpose of the ego is to keep you safe, is to keep you there and safe. So that's why we have those beliefs. It's like, okay, I've got my set of belief, and challenging that belief will feel risky because once you change one belief, the other beliefs around that belief will crumble and your whole belief system will change. That's scary.
Yeah. I want to also go back to, you mentioned like subconsciousness, and you mentioned EMDR. Is that correct? What does that kind of stand for the people that
I'm
don't
gonna
know?
have to Google that. It's a eye movement therapy. So it's a eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR. Yes, so I am not a EMDR therapist, just so you know, right? But
Okay.
I have hired somebody who was a EMDR therapist, and it's all to do with eye movement. It's a very, very efficient way of reducing the intensity of some of your memories you've had that were maybe traumatic or that had a big imprint on the way, one could lead their life. And that was very, very efficient.
If I came to you, right, as like, you are my coach, and I brought up that topic of, my family members are talking about debt, but I'm challenging it. How would you kind of go about that conversation with me? Because let's say I'm, super anxious, I'm feeling a lot of discomfort about having it. How would you help me navigate that conversation with them?
I would try to I would help you make sense of your opinion first and make sure that your opinion is very clear in your mind so you have an easier time articulating what you think and why you think that. And it really depends also if you want to open the box with your peers, with your family, your friends, or whatnot, right? Is it something that you want to discuss or not? And if you want to discuss, why do you want to talk about it, really? I mean, how old are I know you're giving me like an hypothetical kind of situation here, but how old would you be? Because if you're a child, it's different. If you're an adult, like, what is the context?
Sure. Let's assume I'm 24, 25. I've graduated college. I have my first job. I'm doing well. And I don't live at home anymore. And we're coming back. Let's say it's Christmas time or Thanksgiving, and your family members are talking about some huge vacation that just not within the budget for you. You obviously know that you can afford to go, but it's not something you want to put, thousands of dollars to. And you also, the context I would also give is that that your family members shouldn't be going on this trip as well from a financial perspective.
Okay, so there's two things that I see here. First of all, do we want to take responsibility for our family, right? If they decide to go on a holiday, is it our place to stop them or to tell them what to do, right? I feel like sometimes we can get carried away in terms of responsibility, and it's important to remember that some stuff is not part of our business, right? Simple as that. And also, if you cannot afford it, well, if you can afford it, but your priorities are elsewhere, you do not have to share with your family, let's say, why you don't want to do it, right? So you could say, I can't do it, but it's not totally true. It's not that you can't do it, it's that you're choosing to not to, which is different. So it's really owning our decision And we can simply, okay, so when we start explaining why we can't do something or what we don't want, we leave it open for people to have an argument with us and to try to convince us from changing our mind. So this is another thing. But I feel like as people, we have to remember that we do not have to go in details with our decision. We can simply say and put the boundaries in place, which is really important, especially with family, is we are putting a clear boundaries that this, you're 24, this is the age you gave me, you're out of the house, and you can say right now, this is not something I want to do. And that gives a clear boundary. You're respecting your decision, and they are forced to respect your decision. Do you know what I mean? But if you kind of leave it open and say, I can't do it, then you leave it open for them to convince you and to disagree with your decision. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up boundaries because, that's something I think, people that have been in these conditioning situations growing up struggle with. So, if we're going to go back to this, scenario, for example, how would you kind of help somebody navigate that conversation where they struggle to create those boundaries with their family, right? Where, if you say no, that's not a priority for me. I feel like family members will keep kind of poking and digging into like what's the real reason. And I think sometimes you just have to just say no and just leave it there. And if they say why, you just say no. It's up to you to respect my no. It's not my decision, right? And I think saying that alone can be, very stressful and anxious for a lot of people in those situations. So what advice, would you have for those people that struggle to kind of set those boundaries, or if they set them, they struggle to kind of stand on them?
I love this. I really, really, Eric, I love this topic so much. And I mean, when you ask me that question, like, I get really excited and I want to talk about it for like an hour because this is really at the core of what I do as well, boundary. So I'm going to try to not spread myself too much and go in all the tangent because this is such a big topic. But first, it depends on the kind of relationship that this person had with their parents or family as a young person. Were there any patterns that that person is trying to dismantle? Like, for example, patterns as, over pleasing, over giving, being a good person, like a good kid, and trying to really please our parents. What's the history here? Because if that child was not, if that child didn't have their human needs fully met by their parents, so if they had trauma or if they were part of a dysfunctional family, chances are that this adult, right, would have certain habits and patterns that needs to be kind of changed, right? And that, according to that, it wouldn't be as easy, right? But if you had an independent child that is self-assured, then it would be much easier for them to put boundaries. But if you had parents who were maybe narcissists or that were putting too much responsibility, emotional responsibility or mental responsibility on the child, chances are that the child would make decisions to please their parents. Does that make sense so far? I don't want to, let me know if I'm going off tangent, right? Okay.
Yeah, no, please do.
Yeah. So it's so key for the young person, the adult, right, to maybe look at what's going on within. There might be like parts of themselves that needs to be looked at, parts of themselves that needs to be healed, and going from maybe over pleasing to feeling really self-assured or over giving because they crave the love to feeling over giving with themselves and receiving, right? So it's like loads of little like patterns to break and for the brain to rewire to think in a different way and feel in a different way, right? So I can feel myself like going in different directions. One thing is for sure, it's not easy to put boundaries, because chances are if we put a boundary, we are risking being disliked or being judged again and being criticized, and we might feel like we're not belonging anymore in the family system because we put boundaries. And if the family is not used to that, that could create friction. But when you put a boundary in place, it's going to feel really hard at the beginning, but then eventually it's going to feel easier and easier. It's going to be part of what you do and who you are. And as you are doing that, you are subconsciously saying to your brain, I matter. My time matter. I am enough. I respect myself. I respect my values. I respect my needs. I respect what I want, right? And when we do that, when we put boundaries in place, this is what we do. We are sending a message to the brain that we matter, that we love ourselves, that we accept ourselves. And so it's a big step for somebody to take, but it's so needed. It's so needed. And this is how we can become, self-assured, more confident, having more self-belief, more self-trust, because we stand for ourselves, right? With a boundary, when you say no and the family is not used to that, then it might come a bit to a shock. And then I go, you used to let us know everything about your life, and now you are putting those boundaries. So it might cause a little bit of friction. And if they try to argue back, you're going to have to put a gentle boundary again. And you're going to say, actually, I am not willing to talk about it right now. Why not? I'm just not willing to talk about it. You don't need to get into details. So with boundaries, the key is to be very gentle and very firm and assertive and short, not going into explanation as to why we put the boundaries. Otherwise, this is not putting the boundaries because we're explaining about our boundaries, right?
Yep. You said a lot of things that I want to highlight. And that first one is like, I definitely see what you mean when you said like that fear and risk of being disliked and creating friction, because I think when you finally get to a point where you do put your foot down and you create a boundary, that there is a little bit of friction, or they're trying to dive into, why. But I think if you point towards your own values and principles, or this is what I'm doing, I think that's a great place to start. It also reminded me of like growing up, my parents would always be like, oh, because I said so, right? And sometimes you kind of want to just say the same thing to them, but that's obviously not the best way to go about it. But sometimes you just have to say what your where your line is, and then some people, maybe they can get the explanation if you think that they're operating at a level that can accept and understand what you're saying. But if you know that they're not able to get to that depth with you, then I think you just have to leave it at that kind of face value. No, I'm not doing this. Why? Because I'm not. Right. And if their unwillingness to accept that is up to them, not up to you. And I think that's kind of almost where you would have to end the conversation. But I'm very curious, like what your opinion and thoughts are.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, what you said about the people that we are putting the boundaries with, right? At the end of the day, we have to remember that we're dealing with humans. And as human, we all have baggages, stories, a life, conditioning, limits, belief system, and all of that. It's very, very complex. And when we put a boundary in place, the person on the other side of the boundary not feeling so secure in themselves, if they are, have issues with trust or self-belief or confidence, then they are going to project onto the person who's putting boundaries. And this is where we have to remind ourselves when we are putting a boundaries that we are not responsible for somebody else's emotion. If we are putting a boundary in place and that person is feeling insecure or confused, this is not our job to reassure them. But if they want reassurance as grown up, they will need to ask for it, right? Oh, I feel that, your boundary makes me feel a little bit unsafe, or your boundary makes me feel, that as adult, we have to voice how we feel. It's not our job to, what's the word in English? Guess mind, guess in people's mind, what they need. you know. So we have to remember that, reading the mind, we have to remember that everybody is an adult here, and that if it makes somebody else feel unsafe or confused or whatever emotions people have when we put a boundary, it's not for us to reassure the person. It's not for us to bend those boundaries and go like, oh, okay, let's make them a little bit softer so it doesn't really impact you as much, or let's change that a little bit, or maybe that boundary is too harsh. We feel like we've been maybe gaslit, or that we've been a bit too harsh on our boundaries. And so it's really important to remember, when we're putting a boundary, to remember why we're doing it, to stay strong, to be assertive, to be confident with that. It's not an easy job, but it does get easier, I promise you. And then it's for the person on the other side of the boundary to express how they feel about it. That's their job. This is not our job to, make them feel better, for putting our boundaries up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. The one area I'd love to kind of start to get into and illustrate more is getting into your suicide attempts, as well as, you mentioned how you lost your own dad to suicide, and that kind of was the catalyst for your own healing journey and the coaching and space that you're in now. So can you kind of take us back to that experience and what that was like?
Because I was brought up in a dysfunctional family, and my mom was also a narcissist, it was very difficult for me to have good self-esteem and feeling enough, feeling confident in myself. Like, my mom's job as a narcissist was to do everything to cut my wings and to make sure that I was as dependent on her as possible. And so that character trait that she had also impacted my dad, where she was very abusive, mentally and emotionally, and telling him that he was worthless, that, it was not worth living, it was not good enough, it was, just some really awful things. So I was brought up with that. I was brought up witnessing that, my mom and dad arguing, and my mom being really abusive with him. So this was kind of my life as a little girl. And so I didn't feel good in myself, and I felt quite suicidal in myself, and feeling like I don't want to be part of this world. This is just what is going on. I'm just not happy. I'm not feeling heard. My emotions are not validated. My mom doesn't have time for me. She makes me feel like shit. She abused me emotionally, mentally, physically, and I just didn't feel good in myself. I didn't feel like I was worth it, and didn't feel like I belonged, and that I was, good enough. And yeah, I didn't feel really good in myself at all. When I was 18, I lost my grandma to pancreatic cancer. And I really love my grandma. And at that moment, I remember that was the first time where I was exposed to death, and losing somebody that I really, really loved. And when she passed away, I took some, that was the first time where I attempted suicide. So that was like the accumulation of being in an abusive, relationship with my mom. And so I took a lot of pills, to just, end it. And then my brother came, and I was not feeling well, and I told him, and he told my dad, and my dad came, and he said, I just lost my mom, like I just lost my mom. Like, I don't want to lose you as well. Promise me that you won't do that again. And we went to the hospital. I had a lot of things. I can't remember. I felt really vague, and I think I probably blacked out or something. I don't know, but I remember puking, and they gave me some stuff to get the what I've ingested out. And that was the first time where I attempted to take my life. When I was 20, I left France, and I just wanted to start from fresh and just be in the UK and start a new life. And I remember going back to France to see my dad and my mom, and my dad was in the car, and my brother said, "Oh, Dad tried to take his own life. He went to the garage and he turned his engine on and he tried to, he tried to kill himself." And at the time, I was really shocked because, he told me, he said, he made me a promise and he said to me, you promised me that you would never do that again. And so I felt really betrayed by him somehow. And there was a part of me that I just thought it was a cry for help. I didn't believe that he was capable of doing it. And he said, your mom is just too much for me. I just can't do it anymore. I can't live with her anymore. I just can't do it with her. And so that was like the second time where I was kind of exposed to suicide. I came back to France, to the UK. I was in a very toxic relationship with this guy, and it drove me like completely insane. And again, so that I tried at that time to take my own life and used a blade to cut myself. And I was in the mix. I got really scared when it happened. Obviously, it didn't work, and I realized that it was a mistake, and I shouldn't have done that. And there's a part in me, I think, that was still like hoping for a change in life, and that I realized that it didn't have to be that way, you know. And then, and then I remember at the time I was working in a pub, and I had a phone call on my mobile from my mom who said, "Your dad disappeared, and he hasn't left a letter, he hasn't left anything, he's just gone." And I said to her, I'm coming. So I took the Eurostar. So that's the train from London to France. Went straight away there, and trying to look for my dad. We had his picture, and we were like walking around, asking people around, is he in the woods? My dad is not drinking, so we did think, like, where else can he go? And it was very unusual for my dad to do that, and for my dad to just disappear like that. And so I arrived on the Thursday. We looked for him on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, the 16th of March. And I remember that date and I will remember that date forever, where I said to my mom, I said, "I'm going to check the garage." And she said, "But I've already checked. I told you." I said, "I know, but I just feel like checking." And so at the time I was with my brother, and his friend were there. And so we walked. It's maybe like 3-4 minutes walk from our house in France. And as I walked there, I got the key into the garage door, and I opened the big door, and then I saw my dad. So he hanged himself, and I saw him. I saw him there, and it was like the most shocking thing ever. I say to my brother that to go and get mom. The reason why I did that is because I didn't want him to see my dad for longer than he already seen. And so I got his friend, and I asked him to get my dad to cut the rope, and we put him on the floor. And I just did that because I didn't want my sister and my mom to see him the way he was. And that was like the biggest biggest catalyst of my life, where I really realized the fragility of life. And it took me a long time to heal, and maybe there are still parts of myself that I need to heal that are coming up, in my present life, because I still feel something when I'm talking about it. I can talk about it. I've spoken about it for many times, but there's still like some parts of me that are feeling really, really angry against my mom, because I know she's, the main reason why he did that. But anyway, so that's when everything started, where I really understood the fragility of life. And spent years like focusing on myself and focusing on healing and focusing on reconnecting with myself and going, who am I? You know, who is Sabrina? Like, what is she? Because I was so many things for my parents. And I realized that I was the good girl. I was a nice girl. I was the overgiver, the overpleasing, the one who wants to be seen and the one who wants to be loved. And I realized all of that. And so that was a big journey for me to 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 realize all of that and to find myself again, to be able to voice my truth, to be able to feel empowered, to feel strong, to feel happy again, to love myself, to accept myself for who I am, to it's a massive like inward journey. And then from that I, worked in the corporate industry, wanting to do something fulfilling, so I became a massage therapist. And then from that, I was just ready to go more into the depth of healing and decided to become a coach and help people become, I guess, stronger people and people who are empowered to do what they want to do. Yeah. So it's the short version.
Yeah, well, my first reaction is just wow, that's a lot to for me to even conceptualize and think about. So I do want to take a moment for anybody listening, if you are feeling any of these thoughts, to definitely seek out help. If you're talking to friends and maybe they don't take you seriously or they're not willing to support you, then you definitely need some new friends outside of medical professionals. The second thing I have to kind of ask you, Sabrina, is like, what was your mom's reaction to seeing her husband?
Well, my mom is highly narcissist. So her reaction was, how selfish is it to leave me by myself with the kids? How selfish. I will never do that. So that was like more or less, you know, poor me. We've never had, as children, we've never had any support from her. Any kind of, do you need anything? Do you want to talk about it? Let's chat. Let's go to counseling. Because her narcissism is just too much. It really takes over. And so her needs are more important than our needs as children. And I remember being at the hospital after my dad passed away, and somebody asked us, asked my mom, do you want to go counseling? And she said, no, we're fine. We don't need counseling. I mean, the hospital or the person we spoke to, really, what should have happened is for them to say, this is non-negotiable, like you guys have to go to counseling, especially your daughter, because she has seen the thing, like, I mean, I don't think that anyone, well, unless somebody has gone through what I've gone through, it's really hard for people to understand what that was for me. And my mom never kind of gave me any kind of like any support or any I guess credit. That's probably how I felt. Like I never had any kind of, oh my God, are you okay? Like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, are you okay? So I never had that. It was, about her.
Now, in today's like present moment, like, do you think that is she still in that same mindset as when when this happened?
Yes. I've got no hesitation with that. Yeah, I'm not talking to my mom anymore. So I stopped, and this is part of the boundary work also for me, is I realized that even if it's my mom, I do not have to have a relationship with her. And I think as children, grown up children, right, sometimes it feels like there's an obligation to make it work or to forget about our needs and almost brush things off and go, oh, that's okay, it's my mom or it's my dad, I should have a relationship with them. But actually, the truth is that no one has to force somebody to have a relationship with anyone. And if you're not feeling safe with that person, then, and you've tried to maybe change things and get the other person to see your perspective, or to create a healthier relationship, and that person is not open to that, then it's okay and it's safe for you to not have a relationship with that person. So when I realized that, not last August, but the August before, I had a massive argument with my mom because, for the hundredth times or even more, she was, blaming me for something and criticizing me. And I was like, you know what? This stops here. I'm done. I am done with that relationship. And since then, I haven't spoken to her, and she hasn't made any attempt whatsoever to speak to me.
Wow.
Welcome to my world.
That's a lot. I think the one thing that you mentioned too, where you said, just because of who they are doesn't mean you need to have a relationship with them, is so true. And it's something, I remember reading like Reddit threads of, people's families and some of the struggles and issues that they went through. And you would hear stories, nowhere near, your story. And so many people would always say, like, it doesn't matter if it's the president, an ambassador, a CEO, like if they're not willing to give you respect and trust and love, then you don't need a relationship with them, truly, and I think having to read that on like the internet is a very interesting experience, thinking that and realizing that, like, yeah, like just because of their title to you doesn't give them more power or leverage over you.
Absolutely. And I think that sometimes, well, very often the parents think that because you are their children, they think they have some kind of power over you. And sure, when you are little and you are under their responsibility, is for them to make sure that your needs are met as best as possible. But then once you leave the nest, and you are a grown up kind of adult, and then the relationships are equal, right? You want to have respect, and it's like a mutual respect. And again, it comes back to the question, are we doing something out of love or out of fear? So if I've kept the relationship with my mom, am I doing it because I want to play happy family? I want to have a mom, and it gives me the illusion that I have a mom. Am I doing it out of fear, or am I doing it out of love? Because when you go on a self-love journey and self-care and self-acceptance, and this is where self-mastery comes from, right? Like, you have to listen to your needs and listen and give a voice to that little you, that little girl inside you, or a little boy inside you that has got a lot of things to say, and going, are we ignoring that? Are we ignoring the child in us that is like, I don't want to see that person. I don't want to talk to that person. That person makes me feel shit. That person makes me feel insecure. And it's almost like we're overriding that and go, no, we have to do it for the sake of being a family. We have to do it because they're our parents or whatever, And I think it's like, yeah, are we doing that out of love or out of fear?
Yes. Yeah. And I think that really touches on, where I'd like to get into, which is like what your self-love and healing journey looked like, from going through, everything that you've mentioned, and how you kind of got into the NLP space. So you can kind of touch on that healing journey for us.
The healing journey starts, one realizes their importance, or the possibility of their importance and their place in this world, and taking their space at the table. And then it starts with self-inquiry and being very present with oneself, listening to what's going on within. So we often talk about relationship with other people, relationships with friends and teachers and mentors, relationship with brothers, sisters, but there's also a relationship that we have with ourselves. So in order for you to have a good relationship with somebody, and in order for you to have a healthy relationship, a deep relationship, one needs to be okay being vulnerable and share on very transparent and honest details. And this is how we build really strong relationship with one another, right? When we're feeling totally like our guards are down, we're just saying it. We might be hurt, but this is the risk of love, right? Of creating a loving relationship, the risk of being betrayed or the risk of being disliked. But this is how we create genuine, authentic, healthy relationship. So the same rules have to apply with our own self, remembering that we have a relationship with our own self. And the way we do that is by understanding what's in the way of us building that relationship, first of all. How are we distracting ourselves so we are not with ourselves? Phone use, social media, Netflix, drinking, taking drugs, gambling, sex, abusive sex, addictive sex. Just so many little things that we do to do anything to not be with ourselves. So that's important to realize what is in the way of us building an authentic, genuine, loving relationship with ourselves. And then from that place is really having those meetings with ourselves, staying quiet, staying silent. How am I feeling? What's going on? Like cultivating self-awareness. That's really important. What are the thoughts in my head? And being really honest. And that can be really hard because we can have so much shame with the thoughts that we have about ourselves, things we say about ourselves. Like it's always like, I feel like in my times where I didn't feel secure, there was always a manipulation. So and we all do it to a certain extent. We want people to have a good image of us. So we try to manipulate them. We try to be liked, and we're going to say the right thing to get them to see us in a certain way, right? So I think it's amazing. Relationship to self is like the most rewarding thing ever, because when you are cultivating that relationship with yourself and you've been really, really honest and transparent with your own self, even with the doubts, the shame and the guilt you might have about certain thoughts and certain feelings and certain discomfort, and it can be really painful because it comes from a long time ago. It comes from childhood, right? So that relationship is a long term, like it's a very old relationship. And as you're doing that and you're sticking with it and you're sticking with it and you're like, okay, now that I'm learning about myself, I want to take that place in the world. How can I put the boundaries? And how can I do this? How can I just stand strong? How can I be my most authentic? How can I share my truth? Even though people don't like me, I'm just feeling totally self-assured. That's like fucking amazing. And then everything, all your relationships changes because you're changing your relationship. So for me, I've been taking myself as an experiment for a very long time. I read so many like books and read just articles on Google and just doing some searches and trying to understand like human behaviors, and it's just fascinating because we are such complex creatures as humans, and from that place I studied coaching because I wanted to create a bigger impact on people's life that was not physical as massage therapist, although massage also help on an emotional and mental level, but I just wanted to take it a bit deeper. And then, and from that place, I realized that I was very much interested in language, in body language, and facial expressions, and listening to people's words. And I realized that our words are a doorway to our subconscious. The way we speak really tells a lot in what's going on the subconscious. And I've always liked that. I've always loved like listening to people and see what words they're using and how they're using it and going like, oh, they might believe this, or they might feel that way really about this topic because they've used that kind of word or whatever, And so as I'm doing a lot of research and I heard about NLP for the first time from a coach I was following, and I got interested with that. And so I did some research about NLP and got really pulled into that world, and then studied it. I discovered this teacher called Ali Campbell, and I really love his style and I love his passion for it. And I just felt, really compelled to study NLP and to offer it to my clients, because coaching and NLP is so powerful. Working with the consciousness and the subconscious together creates consistent and sustainable results. When you change the programming, when you change the subconscious, then that's it. That your whole world changes, because it's okay to think that you are worth it. Everybody thinks, many people think, oh yeah, of course, I know that I am worth it. But feeling worth it is very different. Like really knowing with every cell in your body that you are worth it, that you just know it, that no one and nothing can take that away from you. That's a different level. That's the subconscious level. And there's many things that we think we are, but actually, do we actually feel it? Like, do we really feel it? And when you work with the subconscious, these are the kind of results you get. You just know it, you just feel it with all your might, you just feel it with every cell in your body. And that's really powerful, because when you get there and you feel that way and you're walking through life with your goals and your aspirations and your vision, like nothing and no one can take you off track. Yes, you can fall off the wagon, but then you're coming back in your life, you just know you're a badass and you're just like, yes, like I'm gonna get all those goals and vision, I'm gonna live my life and my dreams. And it comes from a different place when you just know it,
Yeah, that was a lot and very, very powerful, and I can feel that like you are operating at that like subconscious level, because like I can just see the like your like aura when we went from talking about your dad and that experience to now is like complete 180. How did you almost like go through that reflections and bypassing some of those negative thoughts, and like seeing the light within the conscious and subconscious? Like, can you kind of walk us through like an example of what that looks like for me who doesn't really know or understand like what that looks like, and also for the people listening at home?
I feel like the force that really drove me through all of that, from the moment I was a child in living in a dysfunctional family and losing my dad and having really depression and feeling not belonging, and just feeling really like that was not my space, that I was not meant to be here, to now where I just love my life. And there's always another level, there's always something else, there's always more love and more joy and more fun and more freedom and more all of that. That was like, that was like a fucking big journey for me. Like so much thing has happened, and I think like the thing that really got me through all of that was bravery. The bravery to say this is what I want. The bravery to say I can change. The bravery to believe that things can be different, that I can learn and I can grow. And so bravery really kind of like helped me go through all the challenges and all the hurdles that came to me, and really understanding, like not understanding, but really knowing that there is better for me. There is always better. And when I see people having what I want, or living the kind of life that I want, or experiencing something that I want, it's almost like I tell myself, like, this is the universe winking at you and saying, this is what's possible for you too. When I work with NLP, and I support my clients with that, and with coaching as well, the best way I could describe it is, it's almost like an alignment between the brain and the heart. It's when the brain and the heart, so that the emotions and the thinking are aligned with each other. Because you cannot create something if the emotions and the thinking is misaligned. So the brain creates the thoughts, and the thoughts creates the emotions, and the emotions drive our actions, which creates our reality. But very often, when we have trauma or we've been brought up in a dysfunctional family, or maybe not even that, we've been, we've experienced life as people, and bad situations happen, bad events happen, and it forges how we think and how we feel, right? There are always like layers to bring up to the surface. So there are always layers to dismantle and talk about. And sometimes we might feel like, and I think I touched a little bit on that, like, with the feeling worthy or knowing that you are worthy, right? So many people, like, let's say, for example, are, they think they're confident, right? And that was also something that I've experienced. They think they're confident, but actually it's almost like a facade, like an illusion. So they will do the actions and do the things that will look like they're confident, and they might feel it a little bit, but it's not fully felt. And when it's not fully felt, it's really hard to take. It feels pushy, and it feels hard to take the actions. But if you are knowing and you're really feeling like and you're really thinking things around confidence and you're really feeling it, then your actions are done with greater ease, and it's no effort. It's just flowing. Does that make sense? I'm just worried that I'm going off a tangent. I'm just trying to, yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like there's this like, we can pretend a lot of things, but if we are not really feeling it, then the actions that we're taking is going to feel always like we're hustling or we're grinding and we're pushing and we're forcing. But when the thoughts and the emotions are aligned and it's authentic, then it flows. It's much easier to take the actions in life. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that the way you put that was really helpful to kind of help me understand it, because I think it makes sense in that, like, if you need, like you said, right, the brain and the heart to be in alignment. And I think a lot of people might feel where one is operating at that level, but the other one is not. And so when there's that resistance for, maybe your heart's not fully into something, that like you have that resistance and you have those uncertainty thoughts, which will kind of drive your actions away from doing that, right? You could pick like going to work out or exercise is like a very simple example, right? Like you wake up at 5 a.m. Do you really want to, from a brain perspective, do you really want to work out at 5 a.m.? No, probably not. But your heart is like, no, you got to do this. It's going to make you feel better, right? And then your brain is like, no, I think laying in bed makes me feel better. So you have like a little bit of that friction or resistance. But if you wake up at 5 a.m. and you're like, I have the opportunity to go work out today, and your heart is like, yes, it's going to make you feel better, getting out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning to go exercise is 1,000 times easier. And I definitely have experienced that and felt that. So I understand, where that's coming from.
You've done you've given us a great example there for sure. And why is the brain not on board with it? That's the question. It's because there are certain patterns and certain subconscious beliefs that are still in that programming that are stopping us from thinking, I want to go to the gym. I want to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's not like I have to. There's like a real desire, like a genuine and authentic desire for doing it. Yes, you're right. It's a great example. And then the heart is there and the thinking is there. But if in the mind, the programming on the subconscious level is you're not worth it of exercising, if you're not worth it of putting time for yourself, you're not worth it of all of that, then it's going to feel like a fight.
Yeah. And you touched on bravery as being like the key kind of characteristic that you embodied to get through some of these, challenges, working on yourself. Where did that like inspiration come from, despite growing up in a space where you didn't have that opportunity to kind of feel, at the top of your game almost?
It's a great question, Eric, because there is a part of me that asks myself this question as well, where considering where I've come from, I'm surprised that I've ended up that way because it could have gone two ways. It could have been me like completely, I don't know, where I could have been, don't know, taking drugs or whatever and being in the gutter, I don't know, and being really traumatized and just being really like, depressed and all of that. But it's a good question because I do wonder that myself, and I wonder if, there's a part in me that maybe I don't have a relationship with my mom, but I think something good that I've got from my mom is maybe that part is actually she's quite a strong person and she's very brave and she's very fiery, and so that's good. I got that from her, so thanks, mom. I think it was in the genetics, I think. I don't know, my kind of side. I'm quite rebellious, and so I'm always like, there gotta be another way. Even though I went through depression, I think there was a little part of me that always felt a bit rebellious and a bit like, yeah, just yeah, wanting to expand. And I think when I gave voice to that part of myself, it kind of expanded more and more, and that little voice became a bigger voice. And so I managed to cultivate that, and I became braver and braver and braver and more daring and more like, fuck it, let's do it, let's do this and let's do that, and more adventurous and going, there is a risk, let's take the risk because you can't move forward in a big way if you don't take the risk, you know? So I think that part of me, I connected with that part and I gave it a voice, and that part grew bigger because we've got thousands and thousands of parts, and you can give voice to different parts. You can give voice to the part who wants to play small. And if you give voice to that part, again and again and again, that part is going to play a big role and it's going to be in the driver's seat of your life. If you give voice to the part who doesn't want to take risk, who wants to be shy, who wants to be introverted, and who doesn't want to socialize, then that part is going to take over. Yeah, it's important to realize that as well.
Yeah, I think your rebellion turned to confidence, as like you're going through that pivot in your life almost where you're like, okay, I need to figure out a way. And, you kind of stuck to that bravery as a almost like a form of, rebellion where like I'm tired of living my life like this. It's time to make that shift.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I spoke to one of my coaches as well, she asked me a question which also stayed with me since she asked me that question was, Sabrina, are you taking full accountability right now? And I was like, what? It's like, yeah, of course I take full accountability for things. And she, are you sure? And she said, taking full accountability means not blaming or not criticizing or not giving yourself external reasons as to why you can't do X, Y, Z. And I was like, oh my God, yes, a big part of me does that. A big part of me plays the victim and go like, well, I can't do this because the weather is not good. I can't do this because my car is not working today. I can't do this because I don't have enough resources. Oh my God, like so many excuses. So since then, I mean, that you meet those people in your life where they just say one thing and you're like, oh my God, it's like this light bulb moment. I didn't take full accountability. And so from that moment on, I try my very, very best to remember that and to take accountability as best as I can for things in my life, because it's so easy to blame things, to blame everyone and everything around you as to why you can't have what you want. And then you end up disempowered and like a victim and at the mercy of your life. And that's not a good place.
Yeah, that's definitely not a good place. And I think the one thing I remember reading and learning about was that they said that your life's purpose is to do the thing that you didn't receive as a child, which is pretty much what you have embodied today. And that's, extremely powerful for the people around you and in your life and your clients to kind of see, but also like feel that energy. And so that kind of gets into like my signature question that I'm going to be asking every guest at the end. And that's going to be, how would you define and what are your thoughts and opinions on what is happiness and what is your life's purpose? And it's something I've always kind of asked and talked with so many friends and family, where you're like, what does it even like truly mean? And what do you almost feel like called to do, or what makes you feel alive? And so I wanted to know your thoughts and opinions on that.
It's interesting, that question, because me and my husband spoke about that maybe like a month ago, and brainstorming that concept of happiness. And we had a little back and forth, and that was really interesting. And I I feel like saying maybe, true happiness, it's almost like an illusion, right? I don't believe that we can. I mean, I can say that I'm really happy with my life, but also, it comes in waves. We're not happy 24/7. And being happy, I think, is also being okay and feeling safe when things don't work out our way. When, we come across, when we experience grief, when we experience loss, when we experience discomfort in everyday life. It's in happiness, I think, is like, it's an overall kind of like emotion, perhaps, but it's not, I think the expectation, anyway, for me, when I'm coaching people, and I talk about joy and talk about being happy, I make a real disclaimer of saying, I'm not selling 24/7 joy. Like, it's important to realize that we are humans, and part of being human is to ride the waves, is to be that surfer on the big wave. And sometimes it's going to be like great, and sometimes it's going to be really shit. Or being the captain of a ship, when the weather turns bad. And so happiness, I would say, is still a concept that I'm trying to work out, and I'm not sure 100% what it is, really. Like, what is the right word? Happiness? I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's definitely an ebb and flow is how I like to describe it. Like you mentioned, riding the wave. But I also think it is important, like you mentioned, that you are going to have periods where you're happy and you're going to have periods of when you're down. And you have to learn about yourself in a way so that when you're feeling down, you have the self awareness to know that and then figure out a way to almost like change it. And sometimes, the advice I see is, if your mental space is bad, change your physical space, right? Go outside or do a workout. And sometimes that helps people, or just, change, go call a friend or go call a family member.
Yeah. So in terms of like emotions, and I learned that from Tony Robbins when I took on his course, is that emotions are not emotions that are coming to us. Emotions is what we are creating, right? And many people, like, until I heard that, I always thought emotions is depending on the weather. I'm sad, so the weather is bad, so I'm sad. Or my boyfriend broke up with me, so I'm going to be depressed. It really makes us feel disempowered. So what Tony Robbins said is that there are three factors to create an emotion. There is a language that we are using, so language out loud or in our head. The mental focus, what do we need to focus on? What do we need to think to create that emotion? And physiology. And you said, like going out and doing the things. So when we are mastering those three elements, then we can prime ourselves, and we can create joy, we can create excitement. And so we can operate from that place. So if we want to create amazing things in life, we want to make sure that a lot of the time we are feeling excited, inspired, motivated, joyful, and all of that. But yeah, so that's a way to, master our emotion. But then, happiness is not the exempt of unhappy moment, if that makes sense,
Yeah, and I think Tony Robbins has a lot of good advice, in this space that he's in. And so he has a really good way of framing things in that way. And I really like how you mentioned that those like three kind of pillars, and those three pillars really do make sense on, how to actually get to a better state.
For sure. Yeah. It's great to have that tool.
All right, Sabrina, that wraps up this episode today. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story here with me today. Where can listeners go to find more about you?
So I've got a website, Sabrina-Hall, HALL.com, and you can find me on Facebook as well, and Instagram at I am Sabrina Hall. Thank you. Thanks, Eric, for today. It was great to chat with you and get into that GC conversation with you. Thank you.
Awesome. No, I appreciate it. And listeners, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to email me or DM me in the socials. And as a reminder, please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and leave us a review. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I'm very grateful and appreciative of that. Thank you, Sabrina, for joining me here today.
Thank you.